Okay, so we're recording. So check-in list. I wasn't sure what you meant by that.
Yeah, I think it was to maybe formalize some of the insights from Sheepdog and Proprietarian, and it would help avoid if there was a misapplication of a concept. And I, guys don't tend to have much of a circle that they can unload on or try to get better perspective. I know, and I know it was helpful to get some insight from some guys recently, and it really helped. So
yeah, because it didn't dawn on me until last week what you meant, and I had at first I wasn't sure what you meant by check-in, and then after last week I was like, okay, how is it that we can support each other if we can't check in with each other to make sure that everybody's doing all right? And then the next sort of hurdle from there is for those who are participating, how do we check in with them, which we can't.
Right.
But maybe a forum like this can help others that aren't directly.
But understand, I'm asking for a checklist in a way that kind of asks tough questions. Like if I would have had some of the tough conversations in the relationship, maybe things could have been better, is what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So and that's some of the things that came to mind for me is what are the things that drive us to that load? It's like, are your finances in order? And if they're not, get them in order. Are the resentments building in your relationship? If not, get it solved. It's almost the checklist that the military uses before they send guys out on missions. It's like if your mind is on your family or these problems at home, you're not going to be focused. So make sure you have these items in order because you can't be distracted by it. And then maybe we should have something like that we keep reminding each other about and kind of pushing as a constant message. Kids okay, you arguing with your wife, why? Your finances are okay, is your health okay? And go down that list and just keep checking in on each other.
Yeah.
I think that would be good. And I think that moves us from a Facebook chat session into an actual community, right?
Yeah.
Where we're actually doing what we can for each other.
Yeah, good. I think, like you said, I can't carry your pack, you can't stop type of thing, but we can walk along together. So what does the walking along together look like? And what would be needed if somebody is too tired or exhausted? What is it where they want you to carry their pack? What, to get through that. Like I've had the two rules with Ashton a long time: tell the truth and, do your own work.
Yeah. No, I think that's it's honestly the only way that we can function together. There's another group somebody invited me to. There's a few guys here involved in called the League of Savage Men. And I find it the least savage place on the internet. It's a lot of guys, weak in the knees asking for advice and help all the time. And it's like, this is not savage gentlemanliness, right? That you carry your own load, and maybe indirectly you're like, well, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? As opposed to sort of throwing your issue out there and having other people try to solve it for you. Which is what came to mind when we were talking, that I would take guys backpacking, and I was solo backpacking. So you don't have the option of somebody carrying your pack for you. So I would say to them, you got to carry your own pack, and we can't stop until we get to the camp. It's just not an option. You can't camp on the side of the mountain. And that's really how we support each other. Everybody carries their own weight, but we're walking the path together. So maybe that's what this is. We don't have to sit here and hash out our problems or air our dirty laundry or anything else, but maybe just keep checking in and saying, listen, make sure these things are in line. If you need advice, reach out. But, for the most part, it's our beautiful burdens. Let's carry them together.
Yeah, I like that line, beautiful burdens.
Yeah, I got that from Hernandez. What was his name? I can't remember his first. What was his name? Andrew Hernandez. He used to be on the Proprietarian group. He was all about Tree Remain. He's in Toronto here trying to do like a socially based business where it's educating the youth, it's working out, it's learning skills, all of this. And he wanted me to be a part of it. And then I think he thought I was getting too fascist or something. And he dropped off the radar. Like he's a white nationalist. So he doesn't talk to me anymore. But he used to say that saying, beautiful burden. So
I've heard that, you know, throwing around Nazi or white nationalist or whatever. It's just such a loaded, conflated concept.
Yeah. Yeah.
So dismissive.
I almost hope that they keep doing it so that it loses all power.
Yeah.
Until it's irrelevant. I had a cousin come in from England, and in the UK, it's perfectly normal to make Nazi jokes because they won the war, right? That's kind of part of winning the war is you get to make jokes about them. So we're at bars up and down Yonge Street here because that's what we were doing, is drinking the entire time. But he's making Nazi jokes at the bar and for having to run out the bar and down the street to avoid a brawl. So it was pretty funny. It would be nice if they lost some of the power on that. Okay, so in terms of the checklist, maybe I'll start a thread and we can all sort of just offer suggestions as to what that would be.
Yeah.
And that loosely ties into the other thing that I said that we should talk about, which is the actual creed. I never even really thought of it strictly or formally as a creed, which is that poem, "Guard dogs at home, wolves in battle, never a pet, never a jackal," and flesh that out a little bit more. Because I think it does. It's a parable, but it does give sort of a quick litmus on applied P.
I think before you talked about if you were interacting with somebody, you'd want to start with kind of the easy concepts. Maybe reciprocity would be a good one. Things that are kind of not hot button issues. If I recall, when we were fleshing out a document on truth tests, is don't go after the really troublesome ones first.
Yeah.
So maybe in the creed, you'd go for those and keep the hot button ones that maybe if there's still dissent. I like the frames and aims video. I watched that a couple more times. I think I can be pretty tough on what my frame and aim and hyper communicate it. I'm less empathetic on other frames and aims, and I don't know if I need empathy. I don't think I need sympathy, but there should be an ability to recognize their frames and aims. And point being, still comes back to hot button issues versus simple ones in terms of a creed, or even in a checklist. It would be both of those.
Yeah, and I think that, like for instance, frames and aims is fine. I'm still a little concerned about it being hyper relativist. I mean, the whole point of postmodernism was to cause frame wars. That was the whole point of the language in that, was power through frame manipulation. And so a lot of that conversation we're having is that there's overlap between the reality of frames and how in context and how that affects cognition. And then there's this whole politicized sort of sophistry around it. And how do you distinguish the two? Because I'm pretty intolerant with certain frames as well. And I'm also pretty intolerant that if you're speaking from one frame, not to bump out of it. Like we have a certain context that we're speaking from, don't jump out of it. It's that Mott Bailey argument.
It also kind of kicks the can or moving the goalpost, it seems like.
Exactly. Well, and that's what happens.
You argue another.
If you can jump out of that frame, then all of those other things come with it. And all of a sudden, the goalposts have moved, the criteria has moved, the limits have moved, and that's really the power play behind it. So that's why I was trying to say it, and I didn't voice it clearly, was that third frame, that third reference point between those two frames. I said reality, but it's external. The external world, its consequences. Empiricism has to be the third point, which is the utility again. And when you have utility to measure, and utility isn't the right word, it's consequences, then you can measure the utility of those two aims that those frames are coming from. And when you do that, becomes clear which frames are all about power seeking, and which frames are about achieving a specific goal. Anyway, that's a side point.
Not too far off of that though is a false dichotomy, where, or maybe it's a different one where you're given basically two bad options. Or I recognize I remember it from divorce court. Like, say you're trying to be tolerant and you say, just meet me in the middle, and they're being radical way out here. Like, I want, $15,000 a month and the children are all mine and whatever. And if you try to compromise, now you're compromising over here, where they say, if you're going to go to divorce court, you might as well be on both ends of the spectrum, so that then you get a compromise in the middle.
Right.
I found that maybe you have frames though that are a little ridiculous. So if you try to compromise, you're going to still lean left. Or
well, and I think that does happen when it is arguing from dichotomies or trichotomies, as opposed to spectrum, where then if there is something relevant between those frames or those aims, then they probably rest on a spectrum. Right. And then that becomes a matter of preference. And then if that's the case, why are you arguing which frame is better? Because now they're not. They're just a matter of preference, right? And that's sort of my issue with the GA crowd, is that this is a matter of preference, where they keep saying that there's a utilitarian flaw or an existential flaw with proprietarianism, but they can never explain that from anything but within their frame. Well, and every time they do, it ends up going back to where they're just arguing a preference.
Isn't their thing? It's, instead of primacy of consciousness, it's primacy of linguistics.
I'm the one that asserts that all the time. I don't know if they would necessarily, but
we're trying to argue primacy of reality, and I don't. Even if we try to find the middle ground of that, what's fucking halfway between reality and linguistics?
Well, and it's propaganda. The end of the day, it's primacy of existence only.
Yeah.
And where linguistics come in is in how we interface with that existence. So by saying that cognition is driven so much by language, we can't apprehend existence, therefore we should just look at the language, I think is a way of removing the measuring stick so that you can call anything you want. You can just use language any way you want.
Yeah.
The language is supposed to be a tool to understand reality so you can act.
Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, it always goes back to that, whether it's morality, whether it's knowledge, whether it's truth, it's about the act at the end of the day. So if you're moving that measuring stick, and this is why I get upset with the GA crowd, you remove the measuring stick, what actions are now available to you? And for me, in my bigoted view against absolutists, it's that they just want to fucking manipulate. It's just power seeking at the end of the day, and the use of language for it. But
at a discount.
In about 10 minutes, I'm going to have to switch over to my phone. And probably participate a little less in the conversation, because I have to multitask during the call today.
What should be the pathway we're going on this for the next half an hour?
Well, I think whatever you guys want to touch into. I was going to go over the creed. So the notes that I have here, the four lines, I end up using this a lot with my daughter, but I'm always quoting never a pet, never a jackal. I think the reason being is that they're the negativa statements. And guard dogs at home, wolves in battle, those are the positiva statements, how to be as opposed to what not to be. So the concern then comes up is in the interpretation of the positiva. It's roughly broken out into two sides. One is sort of that stewardship guardian role, whether that's a father or a first responder or whatever, that guard dogs at home. And then the other is about sort of intolerance or forbearance, which is wolves in battle, like being uncompromisingly intolerant on certain conditions. We can flesh those out into actual detail. Like, what does it mean to be a guard dog at home? It's not just about fighting somebody that's coming at your door. It's making sure you're not running into debt. It's making sure that there's food on the plate. Like you're ensuring the stability of the family, right? So we could really dive into details of what it means to be guard dog at home. We can really dive into the details of what it means to be wolves in battle or not a pet. So I thought by looking at that last week, I was like, this should maybe be a formal creed, and we flesh out these sort of 4 categories. What to do as an insurer of last resort, what to do as a protector, which is another form of insurance of last resort, and what are the limits to our behavior, which is never a pet and never a jackal, right? No lies, no impositions. But even never a pet is also, it's not, we can't be outsourcing domains of power or domains of influences that are our own to other people. We don't have owners, right? So it's about not taking shortcuts again. It's about not taking the easy way. It's not about taking undue commands. It doesn't mean that you're not taking commands from betters, but not, folding, right? Having some backbone. So what do I have here? Guard dogs at home. What does it mean? So guardian, stewardship, intergenerational transfer or insurance of that, and it's a positiva statement. Wolves at home. So there's a degree of sacrifice in that, almost limitless sacrifice in terms of if you're actually going to war, that sort of thing. But it's also about no compromise, and it's also about limits and enforcing limits. So for instance, earlier today, my daughter's having some problems with some guys at their school. I called up the dad, said, I'd like to meet with you, and we need to talk. And I'm going to give you an opportunity to straighten this out on your end before I have to straighten it out. Well, that's part of wolves in battle. I'm going to give the guy the opportunity to deal with it, but I'm also going to stand there and say, the line is drawn. You need to make sure it doesn't get crossed. So it's about enforcing these limits and also enforcing our boundaries, right? Our borders. And then I've got never a pet, so no shortcuts, no outsourcing of our power, no free riding, which is also a statement that you got to stand up and be courageous. You can't fold and be a pet. And then never a jackal, again, no shortcuts, no impositions on other people, no lies, which again goes back to an incentive to avoid costs, right? Avoid due diligence. Anyways, I'm going to leave that there. You guys can talk about frames or aims, or you can talk about this. I'm going to just dial in on my phone and change my earphones over, and I'll still participate.
I think you have to also change the host if you're jumping on.
Well, I'll just leave the laptop running. And then I'll be signed in as a second. Where did my link go here?
Okay.
I'll just sign in as another user here.
Well, you might want to blank your video and turn off your mic on there.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what I'll do once this fires up. So it goes up, and there I am. And I'll go over here, and I'll mute this. Oh, technology.
Hey, Todd, how's things?
Not too bad. It's not been that bad.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird coming back after a year.
Yeah. Did you get braces?
Yeah.
All right.
I got food stuck on my teeth. Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries about it. How long do you have to wear them?
Another year.
Oh. And then you have the super shiny choppers?
I hope.
Awesome. So you went to some super uber geek out world and got a bunch of swag?
Yeah, it's weird though, because the people there, I don't know, they generally don't share your same views, so you always feel like you're kind of spying.
Yeah.
Like somebody will come up on stage, they'll tell you about some sort of technology, and then they'll spend 5 minutes going on some sort of bullshit rant about diversity is our strength, or how women get in this thing. It's like, come on. Like, I'm at this conference. There's more women than I've ever seen.
Right.
You don't need to preach this crap anymore.
So a bunch of virtue signaling from the stage as they get paid 10 grand.
Oh yeah, pretty much. My favorite one was a guy who was saying that he wasn't American either. You could tell he had to be like from East Germany or something like that, and he was giving this whole rant about how he doesn't take a plane around anywhere, and he save the planet. And you're just like, dude, I know you're gonna take a private jet after this. Shut up.
Yeah. So what's it like coming back after about a year? I know you wanted to catch up on good breakthroughs and stuff, but was it like riding a bike again, or you just dropped right back in, or?
It's like a mix. I want to say, like, there's a lot of lingo that goes on with the whole proprietarianism thing, where I forget. And, you go back to emotional statements. Like the natural state is where you kind of have a combination of logic and emotion. I think in the community, there's a lot more focus on logic, which is, it's fine. But it's the same kind of thing that I see in IT with like user experience designers versus IT people. Like we think about how we can break it down into atomized functional concepts that work and that are simple and are reusable. And then the UX person thinks about what somebody actually feels. And I'm trying to square that now, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't really have a comment
So
yet.
Bill kind of went out for a little while because he was working on a bias that he was researching, which led to forming Sheepdog. Did you have a bias or something that you were researching yourself that was distancing you, or it was purely for personal reasons?
No.
The memes got boring.
Yeah.
I think that was one of the last things you said.
Yeah, like you can only say things so many times before you're like, okay, I get it. And you got to walk away and kind of get your own fresh view. Honestly, though, I think what really kind of changed me was I think Moritz. He said something like circling the wagons. I did research. Like the one problem I see on Facebook is that you find your in group or enough of your in group, and you just kind of spin your wheels on the same thing and over and over and over again. And sometimes I think you need to go out and then come back. So I kind of felt like that in some ways. Like we're not going to have some sort of right-wing death squad thing anytime soon. We're not going to, go beat anybody up soon. A lot of us got to work on some things, me included. Yeah, it's like I do the math. I mean, like I got to get stronger. I got to get more money. Got to get all these things so we can have networks. That's just how it works. And I don't know. Like I'm the kind of guy where, like during my World of Warcraft days, I can go like 10, 12 hours in a game and get deep into it. I could be online all day. It's not healthy though.
Right.
Not the real world. So I had to quit and find a balance. It wasn't just like the proprietarian or Sheepdog Nomocracy. It was like memes sitting there like Rocky and some of the other people that we know. I just posted the same things over and over again. Like I'm already starting to feel it now. Like I'm back on Facebook. I'm like, oh, this is why I left. Like nothing against anybody here. Everybody's great. I just wish that we live near the same bar.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, I do think that kind of regional areas are coming up, and as it's growing and popularizing, we're going to find more guys in the neighborhood, so to speak. And I was talking to Aloha Steven, and he's made an offer. He's got a pretty large house here, which he left to go move to Alaska. And he said it's open if they wanted to do like a leadership from any of the regions to come this June, July. So the whole house and everything would be free. We probably could do between 8 and 12 guys. Could maybe bring a wife, child if needed, so it could swell from there a little bit. But and he was comparing it to Burning Man, that they found in Burning Man that by doing regional, they could find that the leadership would flow to the top, and then they would have the leadership then fly out to their annual. So maybe something similar would be showing up in Sheepdog and proprietarian circles, where we could have regional leadership, let that sift and circulate and hierarchy, and then let those groups. So anyway, there is an opportunity out here. and it looks like I'll be moving to Kansas City, so I'll be in the mainland area here, I don't know, in a number of months. So maybe we'll have a chance to hit the local bar somewhere.
Yeah. I'm looking to move here in about 3 or 4 years. I finally found a spot that I like. Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina area.
Yeah.
So it's close enough to the heat that, you know, the business is still there and the technology is still flowing, so I won't have a job issue. But it's such a undeveloped area and small city that you can.
Isn't the technology triangle out there?
Yeah, the research triangle. Yeah.
Yeah,
And,
touch base with Stephen Pender. He's out in Raleigh.
Oh, he is? Cool.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll definitely have to get in touch with him.
Good.
I think Robbie Vaughn is out that way too.
Who?
Robbie Vaughn. Robert
Okay.
Vaughn.
If I'm familiar with that person.
He was participating a lot more earlier. He's studying a law degree, but he's kind of an expert in commons and
Cool.
what's her name? Can't remember the woman's name now. Ostrom.
All right. Yeah, though, I mean, the real draw for me, honestly, is more selfish. It's like, you got a 3-hour drive to the mountains. So if it's sweltering hot, I can.
Your hike was out that way too, right?
What?
What you posted something on your hike? Was that also on that Raleigh Durham area?
Yeah.
Okay.
Beautiful out there.
Good.
And then,
well, I'm sure we want guys to be where they're called to be and where they're of use for both themselves and their family. So yeah, get to where you need to be.
Yeah, it gives me a balance of being, from my experience, like more rugged, but still be able to be close to the technology. That's been the frustration for me here. Like, can't be rugged out here. It's just flat land. I mean, Wisconsin's got some bluffs, but yeah, bluffs are mostly for like the zip lining stuff. So it kind of kills the fun.
What about remote work? Then you can go wherever you want. That's what I'm trying to get at eventually.
Yeah, I'm trying to go that way too, man. Like, where I don't have to be reliant on location, but as a fallback, Raleigh, Durham's pretty balanced. The population's pretty low there. The housing's pretty. It's not cheap, but it's pretty cheap, depending on where you want to go. I mean, it's kind of like a good solid balance. It's one of the better places, I'd say, to move in the country right now. Yeah, I'd like to work remote there where I don't have to worry about that stuff.
See, I want it because in Canada, like the Maritimes are like really cheap, and then if stuff's going crazy, like I might go over to Alberta where all the resources and conservative type people are, and wherever you want to be.
Yeah.
You'll just have your mailbox will be somewhere else, but you'll be able to work for somebody and not have to worry about the BS. Yeah, I got you.
Yeah.
That's my goal too. Like,
I worked remotely for years and years and years. For me, it meant not leaving the house very often and playing a lot of Assassin's Creed occasionally, but yeah, it's definitely the life if you can set yourself up with remote work and a good client base. I mean, I had a client base that maintained for over 15 years that I worked on every month. It's definitely a good goal, that's for sure, and you can make money at it too. So
I just
Todd,
like the more practical aspects, though. You don't got to get up at like 6 a.m. to get ready to be heading to the train or your car at 8. I mean, you get up in your pajamas and you start working, and then you leave early because you're.
Well, and the other thing too is you can work. You can start your establishing work around the times that you're most productive. Like I'm not productive first thing in the morning, so I might fire up work at 10:30, 11, shut it down and get dinner, and then pick it up at 8 or 9, and I'd still get an 8 or 10 hour day in, but it would be far more productive than if I was working a 9 to 5.
Yeah, I have that problem too. Like same sort of thing where, like, I'll do 7 to 11, and then like 2 to 6 maybe or something like that. It varies. But it's nice to have like that 4-hour break in the middle of the day.
Yeah, when you took your hiatus, you were working on skills development. Like you were talking about working on cars and a bunch of other stuff. How did that work out?
Got books. Read a couple. I'm gonna say I'm gonna push that out a little bit. I need to buy like a really cheap like car to tinker with. From my experience when I was a kid, you know, like you don't work on an expensive computer. You just just in case you fuck it up. I need like an old Toyota Corolla or something like that to tear apart. I don't know when that's gonna happen. Honestly, it's gotten pushed off. Working on the conceal and carry though.
Find yourself an old Toyota Land Cruiser.
That'd be nice.
Land Cruiser. They're simple. They're probably fit in with some of the other things that you want to do. They're great trucks.
Yeah, it's a great SUV. Yeah, the Land Cruiser. I think I can visualize that. Can't remember what those look like. Yeah, I have a laundry list of things I want to do, like everybody else. Like life gets in the way. So, my work's been consuming though. So, after this last vacation, I've kind of had to reflect on that. Been doing like 10, 11-hour days off and on, so it's not been healthy. Well, maybe I'm back here for like some sort of like psychological examination. I don't know. We've all went down there before, I bet. You know, you get a job that's got a slightly more abusive schedule. It's not good, especially in programmer worlds, because you got the whole like sitting in a chair for 10, 12 hours a day. Your hips start going. your life's talking about work, you know, all that fun stuff.
Do they do ergonomics? Like, will they give you like a standing desk or anything like that?
Yeah, I could probably ask for one. I've seen people with that. I might go down that route. I don't know.
I might too. I just not on the top of the list yet, but it's definitely not good to be, you know, sitting around all day.
Yeah, you start to feel it after a while. Oh my God.
And staring at a screen the same distance all day long is not good at all. That's why I'm blind now.
I keep forgetting that you're supposed to stop and like focus on something at the other side of the room every 30 minutes or something. I totally forgot.
Oh yeah, you're supposed to like shift focus. You do
but who the hell's going to remember to do that when you're decoding 7,000 lines of code? You know what I mean? Like,
so, set an alarm.
It's not just that. It's when you got like people like, hey, can you help me with this? Can you help me with this? You know, look at this thing here. Hey, can you tell me what's going on here? Oh, is this the right file? Is this the right file that you want to do for the push? You know, like, you know, UX designer coming up to you like, hey, are you done with the designs? Can I see what they are? Can I do a review? You know, like all these like people coming to you, and you get that half an hour or that little slice of time around lunch or whatever to get your 2 hours of work that you can actually get done during the day because of meetings and everything else. And you know, time flies.
It's super selfish and disorganized when people act like that. I'm like, look, unless it's an emergency, send me a message and then I'll respond when I reach a good stopping point, because everyone's trying to do things. I know you want it done now, but you know, learn to wait.
Yeah, definitely.
The first 3 years of my marriage was training my wife as to when she can interrupt me when I'm programming. For that same reason, you know, you get an interruption and it can take you 45 minutes to get back to where you were. So yeah, there's a lot of talk about don't bug daddy until he leans back from his chair.
I think it's like good. Like I have a book I was reading on this. It's called Remote, or that guy also wrote a book called Rework. The guy who made the Basecamp productivity software, and he just goes on how like, a lot of that seems pretty much correct to me. It's like constantly interrupting people, pretending that this needs to be done now when it can wait. It's not really useful. Like having these meetings that drag on like 90% of the time or more, it's not really productive.
Yeah, and most of them you don't really need to be in for more than like 5 minutes. Like you'll have like one thing that's said, you're like, oh, hey, me? The rest of the time you're just wasting your time.
Yep.
Learn to.
These are management failures, right? Management will draw in the staff into their meeting so that they don't have to re-communicate it to them later. And then, if they're not subject matter experts, if they don't know the code, then they do that to avoid responsibility. So, I mean, I harp on to people I know in business that any failure is a management failure. Like every failure is a management failure. And to stop offsetting this stuff onto their staff. I mean, you're given an employment contract that is almost never adhered to. Where it's not adhered to is when management's offsetting their tasks to their staff.
Yep, that's pretty much it. What I see though is sometimes I tell my wife about it. It's more like because we both work in agile teams. Business never works agile though. The people above you never work agile. So you're always waiting for the dependencies of them, or they're changing things up on the fly on you, and you're supposed to be working 2 days. I'm gonna have to get a coffee after I finish my statement. 2-week sprints, and it really never pans out to be that way because people are always changing things, and there's too many parties that are interested in the 2-week engagement. I mean, like now, especially with, this is my own specialization, the accessibility field. So not only do I have to get design approvals, do all the front-end user testing, get QA approval, but now I have to go through accessibility teams and get all that worked out and make sure that screen readers are reading it correctly. And it becomes one of those things where like there's too many things to fit into a 2-week window. From my experience anyways, it's no longer just one-dimensional where it's, designer passes off to you, you design it, or you develop it and pass it on to the back-end guy or whatever. It's no longer that. It's much more complex than it really needs to be. I wish the web was somewhat simpler, but then I wouldn't get paid as much. So that's the trade-off.
They're breaking the design pattern too much. I mean, this goes to anything that's organized. That if you have a proper design pattern, your back-end guys and your front-end guys don't need to speak to each other. All they need to know is the data that's flowing between the two. And then the same with your design and your UX. Your UX should apply to any design element, right? And I saw that happen because the original design pattern that I worked from was presentation logic and data, your 3 layers. Mm-hmm. And then from there, you've got your front end, your browser, you've got your middleware, and then you've got your database, right? And those mapped across PLD. And when they brought in model view control, that's when everything started getting messy again. There's these obscure lines where designers are trying to do things that UX programmers should be doing, and battles between. Like I look at how software's evolved over the last 15 years, where you have the rise of Dreamweaver, and that's really essentially designers trying to take over UX programmers' roles, or the rise of ASP.NET, which is the back-end guys trying to take over the front-end programmers' role, right? Because everybody's bickering about who broke the internet, right? And that battle's been going on forever, and the solution to it is just have properly segregated layers, which is everything we talk about in terms of politics as well. The segregation of governance from rule, like having strict design patterns and everybody keeping to their own layer.
Stop conflating things.
Yeah. Everybody's fighting for turf. I mean, that's really what's going on. I mean, like in .NET, they got Razor. Was it Razor MVC? They're trying to do WebAssembly now. I've seen some things where like Rust is trying to take over C, like the low-level language. I mean, some of this is good. I mean, you need some creative destruction here and there. Front end is starting to become back end, and back end is trying to become front end in some ways.
Like I despise Node, and I despise the idea of somebody trying to turn JavaScript into a server. Like what the hell? Every change I make, I have to restart my server. Like what the, and bootstrapping and everything. It drives me up the wall. that's part of the reason why I turned to construction and didn't want to get back into the field, is all of the nonsense that was going on in terms of these languages, these libraries. And they're not even languages now. They're libraries built on languages. I don't even know if these people could actually program a prototype in JavaScript.
Yeah, not in disagreement. And there's so many flaws still out there too with the front end world, which is, I mean, with that whole node stuff. I mean, import and export modules, they're not aligned in such a way that they're like transferable between the two. You got situations where like the node and node modules, especially node modules from NPM, you got situations where like everybody's just pulling from these open source libraries. I mean, like one of the big things I noticed at this last talk I went to was security. Like, how do you secure all these open source libraries? Like, people can just drop random shit in them. You wouldn't even know the difference.
I just had an issue similar to that I was CDing a library. I can't remember. It was a Vue library for producing graphs. And all of a sudden, like out of nowhere, the site's not working. And I can't find it, and I can't find it. And it was an update to a library that I had included a year ago and forgot about. That's now it's colliding with some variable names that I had written after the fact. So, which to me is it's absolutely crazy. It's crazy to be pulling these in, like whether it's CDing in or you're importing off node from other people's servers that could crash. You know, like there's your business is now dependent on these third parties that have no accountability to you. It makes no sense.
I mean, if there's some sort of supporting organization that you can see that's taking a leadership role with it, like React, you know, Facebook's part of it, but they're at least going to have enough people to do security and whatnot to go through and do some of that issue closing work on Git or whatever. Because it's a big enough community. But all these like little libraries people are using for like doing counting calculations and all sorts of other things. I mean, it's crazy because you got to keep on top of everything with that. And I don't think most people do. I know I don't. I mean,
it's almost like you'd have to write tests so that you check for compatibility before you run updates.
Yeah, who has the time?
Yeah, but why is this happening? That's the interesting question. Because, you know, for everybody else that isn't a gearhead that's out there, why are we talking about this specific industry problem? Because really what it is it's being able to grab other people's code that's been offered up freely that creates a constant due diligence issue.
So it's an over-reliance on the third-party plugins or expansions, which is a big thing with WordPress.
But why are you grabbing third-party libraries? Because you don't want to build them yourself. So you're grabbing somebody else's labor. Right, so the old open source, and around the time that Git came out, you weren't seeding in all other people's libraries. You were forking them off into your own. And then if you had a contribution, that you could give it back to the community, and then they would integrate it into their own app. You weren't integrating across libraries. You were sharing them. So you share the label. So your contribution might be to write a tax table for e-commerce, the old open commerce, OS commerce, and in return you get to download the PayPal payment gateway. And that's how it used to be, but now it's so integrated. Everybody's relying on everybody else's labor. It's like, oh well, we'll just take this and we'll throw it in with that. And it's industrialization of a different type of parasitism. It's the kind of parasitism that doesn't cause a direct cost, to say the people you're drawing the labor from, but has an indirect cost to the organizations and the apps that you're building because you're putting their business at risk.
What is the one principle in proprietarianism? I'm trying to think of it now. More like
Never a jackal? Oh no, the other one.
People, never putting the other people at risk. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, what was that?
What?
Oh, so what did you say?
Never putting
there's a principle
at risk. your own product. Like the whole idea of essentially not fucking somebody over. There's too much of that. There really is going to be some sort of reckoning. And I mean, you throw that on top of like HB1 workers and whatnot. Not all of them. I mean, some of them are really, really good programmers. Don't get me wrong. But the majority are not. You're going to get, somebody's going to have a security flaw, like redacted employer or other company, so to speak. You fill in the blanks. One of these banks or whatever are going to have an issue at some point. I just know. Hopefully it's not because of me, but something's going to happen because of the trust of the open source community. I mean, there's too much trust in these.
Well, are these?
Servers.
Did you say banks?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not sure if it's going to be something that hits their servers or anything like on the processing end, but it'll definitely hit the front end.
I would say medical as well, because medical privacy around medical is almost as critical as banks, but they're, because of the regulation around it and their evolution with technology, they're like 10 years behind everybody else on development. They're going to get hit, but yeah, I think like Kurt says, you can't engage in a transaction unless you're able to warrant its failure. And if you're drawing in somebody else's code and libraries, you're not able to warrant against failure. You can't warranty your work.
Yep.
What are you going to do? Shrug your shoulders and say, well, I didn't know that they were going to update their library.
I've been doing
Who updates libraries?
To do, I think my solution has been mostly like, I try to do 95% of my work now in like the base language or the browser DOM scripting side of things, where it's all built in, like taking out the need for dependencies that really need to be done. You can do a lot of stuff now. There's a lot of APIs. You really don't need most of the stuff if you know what you're doing. There are still things, but I mean, it's mostly like in the calculation realm for currency conversions and stuff like that, for input tricks, like all the UX stuff where they want the $sign to be there and blah, 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 as people type. So it looks all formatted correctly depending on, Great Britain or whatever, that kind of thing. But generally speaking, most stuff you can do yourself. Sorry I'm going on like a technology rant. Feel free to take it back to the Sheepdog stuff.
So, I mean, one of the things on Sheepdog is you were finding, like with Sheepdog and proprietarianism, that we were iterating over a lot of the same concepts again. And that's true. But the other side of it is I only like engage in this type of stuff because it does have a direct practical application in day-to-day life. So, I mean, you can definitely let anything on social media become a distraction, but I don't know. I think it's a utility if you use it carefully.
Yeah, I wasn't saying it was. I wasn't trying to blame anybody in this group. Like, it's not really. That is, it's more like I have an addiction problem where, like, if I get to like something enough, it'll take 4 or 5, 6 hours of my day, and that's productivity I wanted back. And it worked out for me. I mean, I got a full-time role at the. No, are we putting this on YouTube? At a U.S. bank, so I'm a full-time developer there.
I will probably be rolling it up to YouTube, just so you know.
Okay. Well, oh well. I don't think anybody's gonna watch that at some point, but like it's just one of those things where, like, I don't know. I've always had a problem with digital. I'm a geek. If I got back into video gaming, I'd probably sabotage my marriage and my fatherhood, and so it's good that I know my bounds. I don't know. I'll stay here for a little bit. I don't know if I'll stay a week, but I would like to jump in on the Zooms. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, well, here's the thing to Alon's point. What we're trying to do is leverage this as a utility where the rest of us are here, the meat space is still here to support you through those things. See, use groups like us instead of abandoning the whole thing.
Yeah, I'll try. We'll see how it works out. I know my personal limits. Like, it had gotten to a point where, like, I'd be sitting on the couch with my wife, at the end of the day, and I'd jump on Facebook, and suddenly it'd be like 10 o'clock in a pretty quick transition, and I hadn't done anything. Just been on Facebook, just going jokes and memes and stuff like that. I was pretty active in the group. It's more of a personal issue, I got to deal with some of that stuff. I like being more productive, though. I think that if we're going to get anywhere here, it's going to be something where it's not only like the ideas, but it's the actual action. And for me, it's getting my life to a better spot. I'd like to wake up one day in 2 or 3 years and be in North Carolina in a big house. Not excessive, $200,000, $300,000 a year if that's remotely even possible. So I can, if you wanted to meet in Las Vegas or some other place, whatever works for anybody, that I can actually afford that. Because right now, like, if somebody's like, hey, we're going to do something in Kansas City, like Bryan's moved to Kansas City, I'll definitely have an issue with like having the flexibility to take a flight. And like Elaine said, like the remote work stuff, that pays off a shit ton. You'd be like, oh yeah, I'll just take my work with me. All right. Kind of.
That's where I'm at. Oh, I was just say that's where I'm at. Like if you, like we're doing with the check-in here, it's like the finances. So like if we're trying to have like meetups, it's like, I don't know how much I can really do that. You gotta take care of the finances.
Yeah. I mean, I feel guilty, like, not guilty. I wouldn't say guilt. I felt like I missed out. It had to be like 2 years ago when Kurt and a bunch of like the old right-wing guys met in, I swear to God, it was New York or Boston or something.
I think
like that.
so.
Yeah, you remember that? Like,
New
I
York,
wanted to be there, Like, I wanted to be there, but my life hasn't allowed that yet. I haven't built enough of a foundation to get that, and I'd like to get there. I'd like to get the fuck out of this cold ass state.
Should be able to climb tech pretty fast, I think. I'm just getting started. I got a full-time web developer job like 6 months ago, so see how fast I can climb.
It grows on you. So how long have you been in full time?
6 months.
6 months. So give it about 4 years. You'll be at a spot where like you'll see, maybe even sooner than that, you'll see like the crappy people from the non-crappy people real quick. I don't know if you have imposter syndrome, but I know I did pretty bad when I started. Not going to school for CS and stuff like that. There's things you miss.
That'd be me. Self-taught from the 90s, yeah.
Depends how difficult.
Yeah, it's difficult. Especially in some of those like hardcore interviews, so they want to do like the hackering stuff and like stuff like that, where you're like the very low level things. I don't know, you just freeze up. Notation questions and other theoretical things that do matter. They do matter, but you just kind of feel stupid in the moment because you really don't use them day to day. It's not like as a front developer, you're like, how many times is something going to hit my server 10,000 times? You don't really think about it unless you're like putting that into your process.
Yeah, that's really strange. Like if you're looking at like a front end position, I'm not sure why they would ask you about big O notation. But if I was looking at like a full stack or a back end job, I would specifically like do those like dummy questions just because they're gonna like quiz you on the spot. So
right.
Until your front end guy writes an AJAX call that hits the server every 3 microseconds or every 3 tenths of a second. What the hell is that? Anyway, we've got Lucas has been pretty quiet. We have Spencer here, and we have Michelle. Anybody got any questions or input or
I'm sorry, I've been.
Oh, no, not at all. We haven't seen you in a year. It's good to get caught up.
Yeah, I could say something. Part of what got me into propertarianism, beyond the perspective system that Kurt's looking to put in place, or proposing, and was kind of the dependencies that are required to learn the system. I was looking at the the periodic table of speech that he has, and there's all these grammars he has, like mathematics, accounting, finance, economics, biology, and there's some of those grammars that I knew I could have immediate utility in my life that were gaps in my knowledge. So that was kind of another incentive to get involved with this, and also to have that community aspect, to be able to bounce around these ideas, kind of informed and added that like repetition to integrate into my memory. And then, so that's kind of like the side benefit of going down this rabbit hole. So.
Yeah, and it is tough. When I think it was about a year and a half ago, I was trying to write up sort of a pathway in, because the problem with proprietarianism is that there are many layers that you can go with it. So in any topic, and it's quite wide. So you can go from economics to sociology to biology to philosophy and so on. But in any one of those silos, you can go very deep as well. And I think what happens is, because Kurt's been doing it 10 years, and then most of us follow, the ones that are active have usually been involved a couple of years, the conversation is 2 or 3 layers deep. And it makes it sound far more complicated and radical than what it really is. There was Daniel Jordan, who's in the group, a guy from Alberta, kind of lurked around for about 6 months and finally asked him, well, what do you think about it? Like, are you on board, or do you have criticisms? And his response was, it's not as complicated as it first appears. And it's not really all that radical at all. Because to a great extent, it's a continuation of what we've already done in Western civilizations, which is continuous disambiguation. So, and when we were looking at that, it was part of a private chat group, and we were looking at it, trying to identify the sort of the entrance points that people come into P from. And at the time, you had sort of your dissident right looking at it from the political side. Then you had guys that were coming in from biology and evolution. Then there was a couple guys like Joel and I that were coming in from epistemology and philosophy. And you could see the area of interest that they were entering in would hit roadblocks. So if you've got a guy coming in just from say epistemology, and then they bump into a conversation on group selection strategy and group survival strategies, they're like, oh my God, racists, and then they back off. Or guys coming in from the dissident right, and then there's all this highfalutin talk, and they get frustrated with the language. So I don't know if there's a real clear-cut way of simplifying that, with the exception to say that once you get demonstrated property, a whole bunch of things fall in line. Once you get the language, like E prime, then understanding what's getting written falls in line. And then it's testimonialism. And if you get testimonialism, then the grammars make sense. That I don't know if you've seen it, Spencer, Kurt's big spreadsheet on the grammars.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. So you got it in the middle, and you go one way, and it's disambiguation. You go the other way, it's ambiguation, grammars of ambiguation. Once you get testimonialism, then you can see what he's getting at, that there are certain grammars that move into an area and then move into greater clarity, and then others into greater obfuscation. So I'd say that those are the 3 areas for anybody new to focus on first. And I keep getting called out, and Kurt called me out again today, to actually get something together like that. sort of a litmus, or even Bryan today, a checklist of ideas so that, proper application for us, proper application of P is applied. But I don't know what to do about it. I'm busy and tired a lot of the time, and I'm an old man. Working construction, it gets tough to sit down at night at 9 o'clock and try to write, and I can barely keep my eyes open. So, yeah.
Maybe there's some delegation that could break off to some of the people that can pull some of the weight. I don't know.
Well, I was asking Elaine before I realized how busy he was to compile sort of old posts that we had together, had written before in Sheepdog and on my line, so that it could at least start breaking it out and then just drawing on, expanding, or just leaving certain sort of essays or posts together. That's one thing that we could do. But I also, and this is the other thing that happens, and I can see it with Alon and with Lucas right now. You guys are jumping in and you're posting, and you're already 3 layers deep. It's like you guys held off until you understood the stuff, and then you came. It's like you're hiding your power level. Then you just came out, blah, and blasted everybody, and it prevents anybody else to see that evolution from newbie, pure newbie, down into where you have some competence with the terminology. So the other thing that's helpful is, if you don't understand, is just dive in and start writing as best you can understand it. And everybody else will come in with corrections or criticisms, and then that deepens the learning faster. But it also gives us sort of that meat on the bone on where people are struggling to understand.
What I found with that is, a lot of times, like, I'd be looking at it, I was like, do I like really understand what this is? But now I've come to realize, even if I don't fully understand it, I'm like, if this did make sense, what would the meaning of this be? What would they actually be saying? And if I put it out in those terms, it's usually pretty close to what, you or Kurt or someone else is trying to say. So yeah.
Yeah. And then it just is a matter of scale at that point. Like, for probably a year and a half, when Kurt would talk about Vitruvianism, I was thinking of it only in terms of sociology, saying if it's something particular in mankind, then it has to be defined by human behavior. And he wasn't. He was talking about neurology and everything that's going on in the course, that man is the measure of all things. But he's talking on a much deeper level than I ever understood. But my level of understanding was helpful. Like, it did get me through and understanding these terms once you kind of get that concept. So knowledge is provisional. It's always going to be updated. It's always going to be improved. And it's not necessarily that you didn't understand it before. You just didn't understand it in different contexts or different layers.
What did you say that topic was? It sounded like, almost like you said trivium, but
Vitruvianism. Vitruvian Man. Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, where he has it's the circle with the man, and it shows all the dimensions or the proportions of fingers to legs within the circle. And so the whole notion behind Vitruvian Man is that man is the measure of man. So your forearm is 3.5 index fingers long. You measure man by man. Well, it goes back to Protagoras, talked about the same notion, that anything that's particular to man, it has to be measured by man. So you can't measure human behavior by ape behavior. You have to define it by human behavior. So when we talk about demonstrated property, historically, we talk about it as an essence or an ideal that exists in the world. When it has nothing to do with that material object in the world. It has to do with our behavior towards that object. So property is something that has to be measured by mankind, not by the extant object in the world. It exists in a human behavior. Well, there's a whole vast array of those topics that we swim in all day. Like money is a Vitruvian concept. It's measured by human behavior. It's not measured by something existentially real in the world, separate from man. So that's when I got Vitruvianism and then demonstrated property, then it fell in place. It's like, oh, okay, so demonstrated property isn't just this great new definition of property. It actually is a real thing. And what makes it a real thing, a real distinction, is human behavior, not anything in the world. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think what initially got a lot of it to stick was where you pointed out the sort of limits on, like Kurt made like the 3 divisions. You have like parasitic, predatory, and then cooperation. And then you pointed out parasitism and predation. It's always like increasing the limits on its strategy, and cooperation is the only one that if you do it right, it'll increase the limits. So if that's true, and it's also true that conflict is deterministic, like if you impose on someone's values, they're going to retaliate as much as
Oh, damn, we lost him right in the middle of the sentence.
in there. It becomes, what was that?
We lost you halfway through your sentence.
Oh. Which one?
Right where you were saying conflict is deterministic.
Okay, so if you have those 3 strategies, and then you also know that conflict is deterministic, people are going to retaliate to the best of their ability when you aggress against one of their values. That's when when I started understanding that, like, it confirmed for me that property is deterministic. I understand that this is how the social sciences would actually have to be structured.
Yeah, and then further to that, the parasitism, predation, and cooperation are all stem from the same drive, which is seeking asymmetrical benefit. And then that drops the moral preference out of the equation, where it's no longer a moral statement. You're no longer arguing for one over the other. It's just, this is the primary concern for humans, asymmetrical benefit. These are 3 strategies to achieve it. These are the limits on each of those strategies, and there's only one strategy that doesn't limit itself, and that's cooperation. So the tendency we all have to make moral justifications is no longer necessary.
Right. You just sort of like state how it is, and then people will just like act out of that bias they all share. They're like, oh, well, I want to be on, the winning side, or they'll even be like, if you point out that something's like parasitic, like people can't usually very well just say, well, no, I do want to, take the parasite strategy. You don't need to make the moral judgment because it's assumed.
Or even that different situations demand different strategies. So you can be in a situation where a predatory, preemptive violence is an adequate strategy. It's not like anything that's not cooperation is inherently immoral.
Yeah, that's true as well.
Right. So it gives you the context to decide what is the appropriate strategy. Right. And I think that ends up being a hurdle for people entering into proprietarianism more so, because then you start hearing, oh, well, violence is never off the table, and like there's a whole other set of sort of moral objections that come up in it, as opposed to focusing on decidability. Like Luke's statement, and it was based on that Duke Newcomb's post on decidability, was absolutely brilliant, and it was really well written because it reads like a recipe. That's one of the things with the language, is that definitions should read like a recipe, one action into the next, to flesh out the definition. That was beautifully done.
Sorry to interject, but you know what I've been thinking about recently since coming back is how a lot of the things in proprietarianism and sheepdog democracy come back to the kind of concept that was around like 40, 50 years ago in like NASA and spaceflight, which is state charts. So you know exactly what thing leads to another thing. There is a set of states that lead to another state. Like you know the flow. And the more that I come back to you guys, the more I realize that there are, that there's a chain of things that happen along the way. It's not just like the simple stuff you think about. It's Kurt and you go way deeper on that, and I appreciate that. You get a lot of that. Same with you, Elaine. Like you guys go deep into it.
But that might be a great way of mapping out sort of lessons through P, or this checklist that we were talking about earlier. Is just charting out state changes. Because eventually you're going to go through a set of states where now a new definition becomes involved. That's a spectra that has different state changes. I mean, that might be exactly what we need to do, set of state charts.
As in like the state that people are in when they come into the study?
I'd say the definitions themselves. So like we take property has 3 distinguishing states. You have possession, whether you can control it or not. Then you have the normative property, which is when other people recognize your possession. So now you don't have to defend it. The state has changed. You no longer have as much demand on defending it because you have a normative agreement. And then the third party insurer, where you have property rights. So now you have a third party ensuring the social recognition of your property. So there's no need to defend it at all. You've centralized the local transaction cost of defense. So that's property in 3 different states. So we could actually do state charts of all of these definitions. That stuff that I was posting on polygamy through monogamy to polyandry is another thing. They're just state changes on slight changes in mate selection strategy. So that ends up being a state chart as well.
Yeah, the Hayekian triangles.
Yeah, so I don't like the triangles as much as the supply demand curves, but yeah, but we could actually do it like an algorithm, like algorithm charts. State 1, and then a change of condition, state 2, change of condition, state 3, change of condition, new definition. We're now you're no longer talking about, say, material property. Now you're moving into social property, and then that has another set of state changes and so on.
Makes sense. So we're talking about like the basics that you would give someone if you're trying to teach them. And did you say there was sort of 3 that you were thinking of? There was testimonialism, and what were the other 2?
Yeah, I would say that understanding a demonstrated definition of property. Once you get that, a lot of stuff falls into place. But to get that, you need that Vitruvianism. Testimonialism opens up to understanding the grammars, but also why we argue certain things, because it is about disambiguation. What was the third one that I had in there? Oh, and E prime, understanding the language. Now, there's a lot of guys that are writing an E prime well enough that I don't think it's as much of a hurdle as when I first got involved. Because when I first got involved, a lot of stuff was just incomprehensible. A lot of stuff I was writing was not understandable at all. But yeah, like E prime and Y E prime, property and Y demonstrated property, and testimonialism. And testimonialism opens up dimensionality, right? That really all of the stuff, these state changes are a matter of geometry, different vectors of influences, creating a specific state. So if you're not accounting for those vectors, you can't claim that you understand the definition. I think those are the 3 core things to get, and then from there, then you can go anywhere with it. You could even map that off the branches of philosophy, where you have your grammar, you have your epistemology, you have your rhetoric, and then out of rhetoric, that branches off into politics, into aesthetics, into ethics, or ethics and politics, and then from there, aesthetics, law, and so on. The other branches from politics into law. That actually might be the right way to go through it, is right there. State changes, or these stating charts would give a good reference point for definitions. Testimonialism covers off epistemology. There would be some tangents into knowledge theories and into truth theories. Then from there into the rhetoric, which is about these things being based in action, because rhetoric is about application. Then from there, you can get into any of these other areas that you're interested in, whether that's politics, so you can go into the politics and the Constitution and stuff, or that's ethics, and then you can move into proprietarianism and reciprocity, or ethics and so on. Those are downstream from these other ones. Maybe we should map it out that way, or at least see if we can map it out that way. In fact, that is just a state chart itself, isn't it? Right? Right. That's just what I just described as a state chart, anyways. So
sorry if I. You gotta take it that way if you don't want to. This is what I think about. Like, I see a consistent pattern showing up again and again and again, and that there is a really good body of work that has come around. Even like some of the things you guys found out about decidability. I mean, like I'm still embracing that. Don't get me wrong. I don't have my head around all the avenues that Kurt and you have touched on. It's been a year, but there is certain states that are consistent, and you know, it's like when you see people of the other ilk. And how they talk about things, like you could almost, like in the back of your mind, like see it coming as their idea pops out of their head, because you know their state change is going to happen.
Yeah,
there's just something you can see the wheels spinning, and you know, like it's going to be one of like three things. You know, like you know it's coming. I'm not saying it's everybody, but there's a majority of people that have this built-in way of thinking, and there's different ways of thinking, and you can, I mean, after we get proprietarianism and sheepdog nomocracy and things around that kind of mapped out, I can imagine that at some point we could map out their mindsets.
Well, it's true too, because one of the things that goes on with that, because I keep going back to Ashby cybernetics, which was before cybernetics became a nonsense term. He talks about basins in closed systems. Cybernetics is really just it is stating change. It is charting changes. You know, A leads to B, that leads to C, and so on. There'll be cybernetic basins that form that eventually it'll rotate back into an earlier position and then just sit there and loop. And I think quite often ideologies are just that. They're just a cybernetic basin based on a certain set of unknown presuppositions. So people come in with these presuppositions, it drives them down one track in those state changes into a basin. So you get some people in a basin up here, other people in a basin up down here, and really the only difference is the presuppositions that they're coming from. So that could be a whole other thing to map on top of a state map, is where do these basins form, and then what's the presupposition behind it. Bryan was talking about steel arming the left's arguments, and I had a conversation with the guys on the job site. Most of these guys are married to teachers, so their wives are deeply embedded in leftist thinking. They're going on about equality. So I steel armed the argument of equality and how it's been a social norm, but how the term's been changed. And I said, really, the presupposition that they're unaware of behind equality is what they're seeking is reciprocity. So if you can enter reciprocity into the conversation, it reveals that presupposition. But now it also gives you a way to show that how they're trying to achieve equality is inherently reciprocal. I can't pronounce the term.
Reciprocal.
Irreciprocal. That would be an example of a cybernetic basin with a presupposition that locks it into itself. And so if you can identify those and pull them out, then that's what can bridge over from one ideology to the other. So this goes back to the conversation with Andy about frames. I think Bryan and I had the conversation. Our very first conversation was on anarchism and libertarianism, and I had just come out of that area into proprietarianism, and we had the greatest conversation that ever happened on the internet. And one of the presuppositions behind anarchists is this blind spot towards the need of defense and the need of rules being enforced, that inevitably you're going to result in a state. You just won't call it a state. So that's one of those hidden presuppositions again that draws a gap from anarchists and libertarians into proprietarianism.
That's why I left libertarian and anarchism, because it when you step far back enough as like a programmer type person, you look at it, you realize that anarchism and libertarianism really are just kind of a transition phase.
Yeah,
they're not and action. There's no action to be carried out. I mean, I've seen some variations of it that have some sort of goal, like what's that Russian nomadic tribe that was around in the Victorian age. I'm drawing a blank, but essentially, like, you can have that sort of work, but there's still a dominance hierarchy there. It's really like a proto-state.
Yeah, and I think like anarchists on the left don't deny that, like anarcho-syndicalists and so on.
Right.
But the presupposition into anarchy and the presupposition into libertarianism goes back again to reciprocity. They're adopting sort of the Marxist notion that anybody with power is an oppressor and that everybody's exploited. So what we need to do is get rid of the government that's oppressing you, or get rid of the capitalists that are oppressing you. Well, what's the presupposition behind oppression? Well, it's reciprocity. So they're seeking reciprocity again. So again, that's a third basis. That's a third basin that could be addressed by the one concept, which is the foundation for natural law. We should make this a project. We should map this out. How are we going to find the bloody time to do this? And map out these concepts, map out where the basins are, and then map out the presuppositions behind it. We can make it into a really big chart like the Epoch's Times did with Donald Trump and Spygate.
It's like module. We could just keep adding more pieces as we go, right? It's like, when do you run out of these modules? You could just keep describing more patterns.
Well, and then further to that, why don't we just build it into an app?
I was actually sort of thinking that. I was like, this would make a cool website.
I knew you guys were, yeah. Then we can assign values to each of these things, and then we can detect other patterns before we've recognized them. Now we've got a whole algorithm. No, we can't do that. That's not going to work. Let's just try mapping it out.
That'll be a good start.
That would be. And then what we could do is we can pull down posts from everybody that apply to each of these nodes, and plug it in. It could almost be a sitemap.
Billy, you think that'll map right to the identity politics one you were talking about?
Well, yeah. The more I look at it, is that identity is as foundational as seeking asymmetrical benefit. I think all identity for us is a catch-all. Okay, let me back up. Human cognition can only process things in quantities of 5 plus or minus 2. So from 3 to 7, depending on your IQ. You can only hold either 3 to 7 things in your head at any one given time. The body of property in total that we've acquired, we map onto our identity so that it's one thing. And then by having that one thing, we have an intuitive or heuristic way of defending it, or recognizing it without having to think about it. So I think identity is as core to us as the need to seek calories, more calories than it takes to produce it. So I used to have a huge issue with identity politics until I realized the guys on the right were pointing out the same abuses to identity that marginalized people have been complaining about for 30 years. They're all seeking the same thing. And then I went, okay, there's something behind this. Well, identity is a property, but that was kind of still top level. Now I'm thinking that really what identity is a means for us to intuitively track the inventory of our properties. And then where we have shared identities, like group identities, really all what we're doing is we're recognizing common interests. So we're recognizing other people that can insure us in exchange for our insurance. So the issue with identity politics is that intuition is being weaponized. That's the problem, is that it's being weaponized.
It's probably being weaponized against their further timeline interest for short-term gain, right?
Well, and I think
Often
the people that are using it can only ever function in short-term gain because they're not people that can produce in the long term.
Right.
And then what's interesting about it, and I don't even know if it was intentional to weaponize identity or if it was instinctual, because it's occurring within these groups themselves. So you have identities pitted against themselves within the left, and then we have the same thing going on the right. So as soon as you start weaponizing identity, it almost becomes this positive feedback loop where you continually weaponize it against smaller and smaller like more nuanced definitions of group, which is, that's interesting. But I think that might also be why atomized individualism becomes an attractive argument, where there are no groups, there's only individuals. It's the highest resolution. It's a way of getting rid of this weaponized identities.
Well, that's why we were saying in proprietarianism, or in Lucas made a comment and I chimed in about in-group, out-group, and then I clarified, but if you can suppress parasitism and lies, then maybe in-group, out-group isn't as important, because you can get something more important.
Yeah, the historical record proves that, though. The more high trust social commons is, the less group identity there is. So group identity, so again, finding people with common interests that will insure your property that you can insure alongside with, the less of an immediate demand or less of an immediate threat against your properties, the less need there is for a group identity. So this is where we hit the upper reaches, the upper limits of cooperation, as we get too prosperous. And one of the first things that drops away is our group centrism. Whether that's ethnocentrism or it's IQ based or whatever the group strategy is, that one of the first things that drops away is group identity. That's then when you see the beginning of these moral degeneracies. Not all of them are moral degeneracies, where there's this hyper individualism. So then you get people trying to push the bounds of social constructs of what's normal. So they want to, you get the glamour rock of the 80s and 90s with Boy George wearing makeup, and like it's about breaking out of these group identities that now seem to be restrictive rather than necessary. Why should I pay into this group? Why should I social signal with the clothes I wear or the language I use if I'm not getting anything in return? So I'm just going to break out of the group, right? So it ends up reinforcing a breakdown because the trust commons has been too high.
I think I was interjecting that the identity politics might map to the same cybernetic basins you were talking about. They might just
I see. Oh, well, I would say that the basins off the bat, yeah, like I would say that there are broad basins that identities would map to, obviously. But I think there might be something else in there, is that when we get into this identity politics, like what we're seeing, weaponized identity, that might map onto a particular set of conditions. It might be a state change in there.
Well, that's why I particularly like the steel man in an argument, and then as you find that there's a presupposition there, and then it's you can make a clarification on that. That could give us really good inroads to people where we can make their argument better and point out something that they should consider. That might be the only way to get through the high defense. We have the quick disgust. They have the openness to ideas, right? Like I think that's where there's a split. So if they have the openness to new ideas and new experience, but we have high disgust, we might be able to at least bridge a little bit and show them where they're missing something. And if they have openness to ideas, maybe that will get through their filters.
That's true. So now they're using temperament to sort of further the discussion.
I'm just circling it back around because I like to circle back around on what I thought was a good idea, and we could have forwarded it back then, was identity politics. And then I had how it mapped to story patterns. So I think it was something that we bookmarked as a possibility. Now you're talking about something of taking these basins, these cybernetic loops, and doing an app for them. I'm saying, hey, we had this from back there.
Yeah.
We also have the truth test document that has moved forward a couple iterations. These are similar cognitive strategies.
Yes, definitely.
I was thinking actually earlier that we could, if we did make the state chart thing, that we could invert it, have it be like a personality type test or something like that, and put it out in the wild.
That's true. Well, that was it Ecos? I can't remember the name of it. It was that clinical research outfit that mapped the big 5 personalities onto endocrine function, and then they pulled it down because they went private, and now they're consulting or something. That was That was absolutely brilliant. I mean, like that's personality right there. This is the reason why people are open to experience is because they experience less stress in environmental searches than others. So why do they preserve less? Well, because it's easier for them to just go out and create something again rather than preserve what they already have. So it's brilliant. And then that could map onto ideologies. So now we're right back to the core course where we're starting with neurology and then working your way forward into, philosophy and epistemology and everything else. Biology draws everything.
And the other thing I was going to say is a lot of what Bryan just brought up was basically how to communicate effectively to people that are in all these different frames. They all have like their own biases or positivas. But what we could do is we can lead into the whole like testimonialism, the property, the E prime. But I think maybe we should front load it, frame it as, this will help you build agency. See how my notes went here. Oh yeah, build agency. It's a science of cooperation. And then we could tie that into even the checklist that we're talking about today. What are like sort of the main areas of your life where you would have to make sure that you have a agency and have the ability to defend the ability for cooperation?
Right. So it increases reciprocity as well, or the potential for reciprocity.
And it short circuits the objections that they're like, oh, you're talking about violence. This is scary. Like,
yeah. And if we had it charted out, we could even say that it could actually end up being an argument map, saying if you're encountering this argument or these ideals, this is the presupposition, and just chart them out. Okay, so brown paper session over. How do we get this to happen?
We each pick a cybernetic basin and start mapping it.
I don't think we would have the basins yet. I think we would have to choose a set of grammars and then start mapping those out as state changes. So state charting out different areas.
I think I have our notes from before, Bill, on identity politics. If you want to,
that would be excellent, and it's gonna map on top of your storylines because the narratives, each of those narratives are going to be, I would say, an expression of the presupposition, right? That's essentially what they are.
I'll chime in. One of the things that I really liked was when you were able to tell Kurt that we could create a proprietarian version of communism or socialism. So I may have been right or centrist or libertarian biased, but when that point came out, then I realized, well, what degree then do I really have a beef with leftists? Aside from, you guys could try it. I would recommend that you have this, and this implemented, or it's not going to work out.
Right.
And if you think it's going to work out, tell me how you can counter and overlook these, 3 core things or whatever.
Right. And I think if anything, if people started constructing these things that they want based on P, what you end up having is a whole set of disparate, societies that have a common ground to cooperate.
Right, because we talked about let 1,000 nations bloom, and it's via negativa. It's like you're free to follow your path. Just don't do X, Y, and Z to me, but you can positiva whatever way you want to aside from that.
Mm-hmm. Now, is that seeking a monopoly on a frame? I don't think it is, because I think that it ends up identifying a methodology rather than a template of ideas.
Well, I'd say anarchy has the monopoly on the frame, because essentially if there was no formations, we do go back to some elements of anarchy, and the only consistent rule that they have is that there's rules but no rulers. So then I say, okay, great, I could agree with that. And one pathway leads to autonomy. If you can really survive and live on your own, I'm willing to give you the space for that. Maybe you can have intergenerational transfer and have no imposition on the community to defending your borders. And, we can have all those conversations. But my point still is that I've always thought that anarchy and libertarian, for the most part, are the best operating system or the best like free-for-all. And then from the free-for-all, what rules are you agreeing to, and have you done those voluntarily? So we have a strong basis. I mean, a lot of us came from anarchist, libertarian. So why not honor why we got to where we got to, and what I just think the most powerful thing always is like, if you can really understand somebody and you're helping them understand themselves and their vision and their ideas even better, then you're winning.
Yeah.
You're winning.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I mean, ultimately at the end of the day, like with anarchist rules without rulers, as soon as they find a way, or if they can construct a way to enforce those rules, what they've now become is a democracy, right? And then the same thing with libertarians, when they've found the constraints against power that they're looking for, what have they become? They've become a democracy. So it goes right back to that again, that we're the democratists, and any form of government is just a point on a spectrum of democracy, different forms of democracy.
And then maybe this can let us help people bring this out of their own frames, instead of us having to come in and say, we're here to like impose democracy on everyone.
Right.
I mean, obviously you would to the extent you can, but all the better if you can get people to recognize how it's in their interest. Right.
And then from there, you're not trying to win a debate or recruit. All you're trying to do is update their frame. So they're allowed their frame, they're allowed their space, but now you're bringing greater nuance or detail into it.
Plus proselytizing, and it kind of opens up the commons for more, I don't know.
Well, for more cooperation, for less frictions, and the result of less frictions is greater velocity. And what is velocity but prosperity, right? Okay, so I think this a pretty like flippin' cool project that we could get together. Should we split up different sections of grammars that we can start state charting?
I think a shared Google Doc or other service, if we wanted to, I could upload notes, and then people could send me messages if they want to participate on the document. It tracks changes, so
right.
Anything could be reversed if there was a section that was edited wrong or whatever. Right,
and if we can see the history of it, then if it's been updated incorrectly or we discover something later, we can always go back. So there's a what do you call it? Persistence of truth there. And then the document can be a single source of truth, so that we don't have a million versions going everywhere.
Yeah.
One of the low-hanging fruits might be to just pull down posts, do searches and pull down posts that already outline, definitions as spectra. Because the spectrum is going to be the state change, right? Even what Luke just did on decidability with his 4 statements, there are 4 different states of decidability, right? That's right. A set of state changes. Okay, well, let's do that. Brian, if you could set up the document, that'd be fantastic. And
sure, I'll find a note.
Yeah, Lon's already taking notes, so he's already got something in his mind.
Okay.
What are you thinking, Alon?
So right now I was just writing down spectras are state changes, choose a set of grammars and map the state changes. So what would be the grammars that might be the first sort of main ones that we think would be useful for people?
Well, I think that each of us all tend to specialize to some degree, that maybe we should focus on what our specialties are. We all tend to overlap because we have similar temperaments. So I think we all sort of focus on reciprocity and sort of the moral side of it. I can quickly map out property. That's not a problem. Maybe what I'll do in terms of lead into testimonialism is looking at the different forms of logics, like abduction into induction to deduction, apophasis, that sort of thing. I can map out those state changes. I can do that quickly enough. And I can probably map out the same thing from polygamy through polyandry. Let's say I'll take those 3 for this week. Bryan, you can do the storylines, do the myth matrix.
Yep. I can also put the notes that you had from identity politics, which included leftist, libertarian. I think you gave mostly their flaws. There wasn't a steel man in that, but at least it'll give a starting point.
Was this the one where I
Just
was
so
saying
I'm
that
clear.
each one is seeking democracy? Like the left is, but when they do it, they actually are this, and when anarchists do
I
this,
think
they
you
are
were
that.
finding that there was similar, like who was their monster in the house. You could find out her enemy is, who is the big bad monster in the house, was like one of the things that you're able to elucidate, and that there was some correlations where it was just kind of the reverse. It was pretty clear. There was one monster was the other man's angel, so to speak.
Right. Okay. And then I guess after this, I'll post a timestamp and say that we've got a project on the go and see who else is willing to chime in. Spencer, you've been spending a fair amount of time, I think, on law, haven't you?
Yeah, recently I've been, originally I got into some Hayek, and then I got into Bastiat's law, and right now I'm in Law and Freedom by the Italian guy. And it's really
Bastiat?
helping opening up the purpose of reciprocity coming as subject to, or sorry, legislation and regulation subject to the reciprocity law.
Right.
So
Right.
that was kind of the main hurdle for me
Yeah.
at that point. I didn't have the structure. I guess some of the larger government structures. I kind of got a little bit of a introduction to that through going through the Constitution.
Right.
But going to the reading list and looking at some of your guys' suggestions really filled that out for me. So I'm still kind of solidifying those concepts.
Excellent.
I had a question as well. Sorry.
Sure.
I don't know, maybe a request or for recommendations. So I see this cybernetics as kind of a common tool that's being used in these for these like state changes and basins for putting together this document. I have a table of contents here for the book, Ashby's book.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if there's, I've been through the first part one, but I'm wondering if there's other chapters in there that maybe might be useful for putting together these sort of documents. But I might post this table of contents to maybe
and highlight it. I think it was I usually tend to draw, and I think it's the first. I can't remember if it's 6 or 8. It's from where he moves from a single closed system, which is where basins come in, to where you have you have open systems, either two systems interacting or you have an open system. And I think that's the second section of the book. I'm not sure which chapter it's at. So most of what I'm drawing on is the first part of the book, which I have to admit, it could be an error, because how many zero-sum games do we actually play in a single closed system is an assumption of zero-sum games. So, but I think it's a useful tool, at least at the beginning. Oh, the other thing that I could map out is the sovereignty through liberty, or state changes as well.
Yeah.
So I'll put that on my list too, because you go from autonomy through sovereignty to liberty, then to freedom. Those are all state changes, the same thing. State changes of autonomy or preserving autonomy. So what do I have there? I have property, I have epistemology, I have polygamy, monogamy, and I have sovereignty. I can start with those. You're muted, Alon.
Yeah, the only one that's jumped to my head so far would be the strategies for achieving asymmetry. Those be like, state change?
Yeah, I think it would, because and that's in the article. I had my own little notation, that little proto notation system.
Oh yeah.
Because each of those strategies are based on the incentives, right?
Because it, yeah.
Predation is a willingness to take on higher risk for immediate gain, right? Parasitism is an attempt to lower risk and lower costs for a longer term game, a midterm game. So those would be your conditions that are changing the state. Yeah, and then the one presupposition behind all of that is any mobile organism, anything that's not a plant, is forced to seek opportunity. You can't just sit and absorb. All right, I think that's a game plan.
So is the outcome to create a
big
flow
map.
chart?
A big map.
A meritocracy and a hierarchy of arguments and identities and cybernetic basins, and these are all gonna. So from an end user experience, largely they're going to be interacting with arguments online. They'll probably be able to quickly figure out somebody's identity, not to always great success, but you can kind of see where somebody's bias or their lean is. You're going to see either the success or the failure of their argument. You can steel man the argument they didn't even make that well. You can show the central flaw of the identity or that argument. And then the effort is to then improve it into a way that it leads in a natural funnel towards formulating a democracy, creating decidability, better decidability, improving whatever commons they're choosing or trying to create in their efforts to signal online.
Mm-hmm. And I think for us, we keep getting tapped as the university, the teachers. This gives us a really excellent way of training people's intuitions towards spectrums and dimensionality and getting out of idealistic or moral justificationary arguments.
It also answers really well on that dominance. Remember, there was a conflict when I was saying, no, dominant just meaning the main way it is the default that we go to versus to dominate.
Right.
You must do it this way.
Yeah.
If you get into spectra and being able to improve other people's arguments, yet still pointing out where their flaws or incompletes are, then there's nothing dominant about that. You're really trying to teach and encourage them to better or think for themselves or survive or live with their own consequences.
Yeah, and that becomes a useful tool in the actual conversation. Like when you're embroiled in it, is because you can go down these garden paths with leading questions rather than rebuttals and assertions. So it's a really good way of lowering the defenses, building rapport, and then coming to a common ground.
Well, I also think it's going to make a huge dent in this idea of frames and aims to some degree, as we were saying, is highly subjective. And if you move out of that more into spectra and spectrums, then it becomes, well, where are you on that? And is it going to naturally progress this way or this way? Which are you holding multiple frames that in themselves can be internal conflictions?
Right.
Contradictory, create your own cognitive dissonance because you support this side, yet it inherently overlooks this. And yeah, I think it could be really helpful. I was just trying to see from a user's experience, where would they dive in? But we don't know in terms of teaching where somebody's going to find the most easiest entrance point to the maps. I think it could be arguments because Facebook is set up that way that you have comments and replies.
Well, I like the idea of it being a graphical chart because you can dive into a chart in any location that draws your interest.
Right.
And then further to that, I think you dropped off for a little bit. We were talking about if we have this mapped out, these can almost be a sitemap into content. So you're clicking into one particular node, and then you can draw up the articles and other things that have been written on it.
Right.
And that's where you can find the meat of the arguments, right?
All right. There was the Kurt's warm invitation to become the priesthood.
Yeah, warm.
I was going to reply, do you get to carry around some form of rosary?
Yeah. Kneel or the sun won't rise. Yeah, he's lighting a fire into my butt. I haven't been as active as I need to be. And I was having a conversation with him on it, saying that I just want like 5 weeks to sit in a cabin, and 2 of them is to write up a draft for a book, and 2 is to get caught up on his course, and 3 is to plan out what we're doing with Sheepdog. And he's like, well, where's the excuse? Yeah, okay. I'm going to sign off now.
Yep.
We'll try to get this stuff organized. Todd, great suggestion. Thank you. You've just created a monster. Great seeing you again.
Yeah,
Michelle,
sorry.
yeah. Michelle, one day I know we're going to get to see your face and hear your voice. In the meantime, you're always welcome, and thanks for being here. Spencer, I have to applaud. You're doing a tremendous amount of due diligence. That's obvious and highly respected. And as for Bryan and Alan, well, see you guys around. Always talk to you guys.
Hi.
Love you all. Okay. Thank you, guys.
Interrupt for a second?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. Just because I have a 5-month-old, so he's watching the screen and listening to you guys talk, but I have to keep him muted because he wants to join the conversation. So yeah, definitely. Definitely great conversation, very insightful. So I'm sure in the future I'll add more. But just to quickly reiterate on touching base on why the newbie doesn't really engage. For someone like myself, if I don't quite understand something and I'm still in the learning process, I feel like me saying something that if it doesn't need to be said, I just don't say it.
Yeah, that's
I'd
true.
rather sit and learn and just kind of listen in and listen to the different perspectives, and that's kind of what works for me. So prior, years ago, I could say it was my ego, but now it's just a matter of really just being open-minded enough and comprehending. And I have this thing about me where if I don't understand something, I need to figure it out like
Beforehand.
Yeah.
I stumbled across Kurt when it was a little less active about 4 years ago. So he would post prolifically like he always does, but there wasn't a whole lot of interaction with the audience. It was just the typical guys just commenting back that they already knew what he was talking about. So when I dove in, I was like, fuck it. And I would just write, like, is this what you mean? And I would start writing out these arguments, and that started getting conversations going. And of course, it made me a fool for a lot of the time because I'm writing shit that I have no idea what I'm talking about. But you could track the evolution of going from absolutely nothing. I started on the sovereignty line while I was trying to figure out his epistemology. So I'd write all these things in sovereignty. Could it be this way? Could it be that way? So I kind of, tell everybody that they should be like me. The world would be a better place if everybody was like me.
Yeah. I think
I try to encourage people to jump in earlier than they're comfortable.
Yeah, I've definitely had my questions. I'm more of a private person. I'll message somebody privately and ask my questions as opposed to engaging. But that's just a comfort zone thing where I don't know people, and I just kind of take my time, feel out who's who, and someone like Elaine, someone such as yourself and Bill, we've had a couple of interactions, and you can kind of don't want to say get the respect, but lots of newbies in P, and I just don't really want to engage with them because I truly want to learn, from the best, the people who really have done their homework and
well, I'm sure
vicariously.
Everybody here will answer your text messages if you have questions.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So
yeah.
It's a great situation. So yeah, but the conversations will come as the time is able to. So
yeah, that's what we expect. All right.
Thank you.
Okay, take care, guys.
You too.
Take care.
See you next week.
See you guys again.
Yep.